Hello, gentlemen. It's been
What's
a
up, man?
minute, so it's good to see
Hello.
you all. Sam,
Hi.
we are still taken back by your lack of hair. It's growing in, but
It's already, it grows.
it's
It's
so-
growing back pretty quickly.
it's so startling to see you without your twists or your braids or just your fro. So it's good to have you back. And you got these nice designer glasses. I don't know. They look like evil German scientist glasses, but
Oh, a little bit.
You're rocking them.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Wes. That is really the compliment I needed to make.
If you were wearing a lab coat and had some test tubes, I wouldn't question it.
Congratulations. Thank you, audience. Now, Wes, I think the glasses don't look like that, but according to Wes, I look like a war criminal. So really appreciate the Saturday vibes.
An amazing one.
I mean, I guess if I'm dripped out, you take what you can get.
Hell yeah.
And we'll be
You could be diabolical.
Don't worry, we're going to be talking about war criminals today.
For sure. Brian, you haven't had any world travels lately, have you? Jetting off to Guam or anything?
Patagonia.
Yeah.
I jetted off to Manhattan last night. Does that count? It's like
No.
a world in and of itself.
It is a world of itself. What made you make the trip across the East River?
I went for some jazz. It was jazz night.
Okay.
In the Redondo Concepcion household. We had a little jazz.
A man of culture.
We saw a quintet. It was pretty good. I enjoyed myself. Yeah.
Very cool. Did you grab some dinner beforehand or after?
Afterward. And then we had a lovely Lebanese dinner. Because this is what you do in Manhattan, man. You're taking some jazz, you have some labne, call it a night.
Nice. You gonna shout out the restaurant? Was it good?
It was called like Ili.
All
something like that.
Hopefully that wasn't racist and we're not getting canceled by that.
Who knows? Who knows?
I don't know Brian like that.
I did not pick the restaurant.
That was all Brian. If that turns out to be offensive, friends, we had no idea that was coming. We do not condone racism.
All of our Lebanese fans, let us know.
Yeah.
What's up, Beirut?
All right. Okay, so this episode we're gonna talk about Fallout, a brand new show that showed up on Amazon a couple of weeks ago. They dropped all 8 episodes at once. It wasn't really on our radar. I think we didn't really start talking about watching it until about a month ago. So I wanted to get your guys' sense of where are you on the Fallout world, on Fallout games? Are you into them? Do you know anything about them? Because I'm coming in with zero background on Fallout. I don't even know if I could name you the Fallout games. I think there's a Fallout 4 because Kendall was playing that the other day. But
I'm pretty sure there's a Fallout Las Vegas.
Is that Las Vegas?
New Vegas, yeah.
New Vegas. Okay, so that's where I'm at. I'm at level 0, so I need to step up my elevator here. Brian, Sav, where are you guys at?
I'm more at a level 2, probably. Like I know that the series existed. Yeah. I know it's about nuclear fallout and
never played it.
First person, never played it. I'm familiar with Pip-Boy. I know there was like a Pip-Boy mobile game that was really hot like a few years ago. But I did have this show on my radar because the Westworld creators are behind this show. Jonathan Nolan, Christopher Nolan's brother.
Whoa.
Who's notable for Westworld, has helped write Christopher Nolan write some stuff. Wrote the short story that Memento is based off of. So he's a solid creator. If you think Westworld was good, Westworld was great the first season, then like really fell off. But still like a TV producer that you want to follow.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Sav?
Yeah, so I guess I'm the other farther end of the spectrum. I have a lot of experience with the series.
Okay.
I played a little bit of Fallout 3, a little bit of New Vegas when I was younger, but those games more 08 came out a while ago. I played them.
So this is like PS3?
PS3.
Okay.
Yeah, so PS3 era, played those a little bit, but never really super deep dived in. But I was familiar with the series. Fallout 4, the most recent main entry that came out for 2016, was the one I really deep dived into. Me, Tyler, Kendall all got into it. And I've played that game top to bottom. I think I've done everything there is to do, all the DLC. So that's where the bulk of my knowledge.
Do you prefer to be on the top or the bottom?
Oh my god.
Are we 8? Oh, he ate. Anyways, yeah. So I have a lot of
It's at least a
experience.
12-year-old joke.
So
Come
I
on.
have a lot of experience with the series,
Okay.
I feel
and
like he vacillates between the two. Anyway,
and I had a good amount of context of like just what takes place in the story, or the factions and some of the things happening in the world around the story.
I feel like that would have been helpful having had that knowledge going in. So you might have gotten a little bit more out of the show than maybe I did, or had a more grounded sense of like where you were. I felt really confused for a lot of this.
Yeah, but I think the
is
confusion is
that new,
intention.
Wes? Is that
Yeah,
new?
Let's
Let's be
one is the
honest.
standard West.
Yeah, that might just be me too.
No, but I think,
that's fair.
but what I do enjoy is that I like. I think what can make it fun, especially when they're not adapting a direct story, they're just having it take place in the larger world, is that it's fun for me to appreciate it and see how they make it accessible to someone who doesn't have context. But also, part of the fun of the series is you're wondering what the hell happened. And because when I played through the games, I was in the same spot you were in starting the show. Oh, the world ended. Okay, well, it didn't just end overnight. Like, how did it happen? And as you play through the games, you explore buildings, you piece together stories, you meet characters, you start to piece together, oh, this is what happened, these are the remnants of this, oh, this is what happened to this area, and you kind of figure out, oh, this is how the world ended, or these are stories of when the world ended. But that's part of the fun of the series, right? So it's nice to know it going in, but it's still nice to also, for you as a watcher, to just kind of figure out, man, what the hell happened, right? And you, Wes, you finished it, so you got to kind of figure out a little bit of who the really major players were, and I'm sure that's really satisfying to see, and you probably want to know more of, man, ooh, how did this shit show happen, and what's gonna happen? What's the fallout of all this gonna be?
Yeah. The story fallout. The story fallout.
Are you high-fiving yourself?
Yeah,
Come on.
gotta give myself my props. You gotta give yourself your flowers.
You need a third arm to pat yourself on the back.
All right, we'll leave that alone. So this show has.
Make that dirty. That was not dirty, Wes.
I mean,
Third
sounded like
leg
it.
would have been.
Okay. This show had a solid 8 episodes. Well, I don't know if they're solid, but 8 episodes. They released them all at once, so you could binge watch them, kind of like an old school Netflix show. So
are we really calling Netflix shows old school now? Like old school Netflix shows? That's a thing?
Netflix used to get discs off Netflix, man. Like, yes, there's old school Netflix. I used to get my Netflix DVDs ordered to my house.
I really enjoyed those days, by the way.
That was so fun.
That felt like some real elite shit. I felt like a secret agent. I had the Netflix. My mom said, your movie came in the mail. Yes. The Teen Titans movie on DVD with the extra features.
Did you ever do like two DVD at a time plan? So you had to load up on movies so you could send like watch one but have one sending back to get the next one coming through.
Early Netflix, I was in my bag. Middle high school me was in his Netflix bag.
Nice. Yeah, you spent a lot of time like making your queue, right? Like perfecting like which one was gonna come next.
Oh yeah,
that was nice.
Oh yeah, that was necessary because you don't want a gap between the mailings.
Exactly. Yeah, you got to have it swapped out like perfectly timed. Yeah,
yes,
as soon as you were done with that movie, it was back in the envelope. As soon as you were not wasting any time.
Fallout. It's all at once.
So we got 8 episodes. We will be talking spoilers, but probably only for the first few episodes. So maybe the first 5 or 6. Well, I guess that's not first few, but we're not going to spoil the ending. Brian hasn't seen the last 2 episodes, so we'll leave that for sure untouched. And then, we'll try not to spoil any like major things, but obviously there's got to be some spoilerage because we'll be talking about the characters and some of the things they go through. So let's just talk about the first couple of episodes where you're just like really thrown into this world, kind of waist deep, shoulder deep, and not given a whole lot of answers. How did you like the introduction to the world, those first couple of episodes? Sav, what were you thinking? What were you liking?
Yeah, the biggest thing I liked was my question about this show was always going to be one of tone. Fallout has a very interesting tone in its game where it's incredibly violent and it's a brutal world, right? And you see the violence in the show. It's a rated M adult show for a reason. But it is simultaneously very campy and almost satirical in how it makes fun of that 1960s aesthetic and, that retro future type stuff. It's almost like kind of silly, juxtaposed with the graphic violence. and then you have the old timey music playing, and there's like high tech stuff, but it's high tech but goofy at the same time, right? Like I was always curious of how they were going to capture that tone in the show, and they just captured it really well. It is an apocalypse. It's a dirty, nasty, brutal world. It is also simultaneously campy and goofy at the same time, while people are getting limbs blown off, but also the stakes are high and serious because people die and like death is for real and there's consequences. And so my first impression was that they captured the tone of the games very well, and I thought that was going to be my biggest question/challenge about a show like this, because if it's too brutal, you lose the fun part of what makes Fallout good. But if it's too silly, then you lose that, hey, this is like still a brutal post-apocalypse, and they balanced that very well.
Brian?
Yeah, so they're basically like three main environments, three main characters that they introduce us to in the first episode, right? So like one, you have the people in the Fallout shelter, right? Who kind of like the show Silo.
The Vault Dwellers.
There's definitely some
Silo.
like shared themes and tropes, being the last human civilization because of the nuclear fallout that happened outside of said Fallout shelter. They're afraid of radiation, they're afraid of basically humanity ending, and they feel like they're the saviors. And so in that very like compressed and isolated world of the Fallout shelter, they're really wacky, right? They have like fake suns and fake outdoors and have all this protocol about how they're supposed to behave, and they all wear the same jumpsuit.
It's a hardcore meritocracy too.
Yeah. And like they have sort of like these silly rituals, and you can tell, like we talked about, Savon, you mentioned this earlier before we started recording, like it's a little cultish in their behavior. Right. And so there's a twisted funniness to that. And then you have the 60, I don't know if it's the 60s actually, but like that whole retro future backstory, right? It's like pre-nuclear bombs being dropped, where it feels like Leave It to Beaver or like one of those old timey shows, but they have technology that definitely did not exist in our actual 1950s, 60s past.
Yeah, it's like 2077 or something.
Yeah.
Zav.
So actually, so this is actually a non-spoiler context piece I can give you to kind of understand why things in the show looks the way it is. The premise of Fallout is that it's an alternate timeline of how our actual history went, so it kind of diverges off. So basically, the Cold War during the actual 1950s, the Red Scare period, there's actually not a war, and everyone leans into nuclear energy in the world. And so the world actually ushers in an age of like nuclear technology. So that's why everything you see has that really big, bulky nuclear look. But I guess in this world, they never invented microchips. So everything is nuclear powered and really techie, and that's why there's that future techie look. But everything's still very bulky and has that very old school aesthetic. All that to say, by the time you reach 2077, when the actual bombs drop and all that stuff pops off, there was never a like global war before that, and so there's a resource war leading up to it, and you can catch hints of that in the first few episodes. So basically, there's no nuclear war; everyone becomes nuclear like powered dope tech, but you have a resource war, and that's what leads into like the 2077. Because by the time the bombs drop, they're still like 50 years ahead of what our current timeline is. So just to kind of, so it's like it looks all 1960s, but it's actually still their future, but a little bit of the just context of why it looks the way it is.
Yeah, so it gives the show like a reason and excuse to really use old-timey music in funny ways, right? Like they drop like some jingles while people are getting murdered and maimed and stuff like that. And then they also have, Argyle design, branding on stuff. And of course you got Pip-Boy, right?
Mm-hmm.
With, which is the Vault Tech logo, like the little cutesy cartoon guy giving the thumbs up very, very famously related to Fallout, right? And so you get that kind of aesthetic throughout the show that I think makes for some very funny and dissonant moments, right? Where you're combining these aesthetics for, for satire, for fun, just, for a good time, really. And then the third environment and character that we're following are the people that live outside of the fallout shelters, the surface dwellers, if you will. And in particular, we're following this one guy, Maximus, who's part of like a brotherhood of knights and squires, or something like that.
Yep.
I'm still a little unclear as to like how they exist or whatever.
Also
But
a cult of some
but
sort.
you
They're
could
just a
tell.
quasi-military group. You get the gist
I
of
don't.
it.
I have no idea who's backing them or who administrates them or whatever. But they just exist as this military group, as you say. But you could tell that the surface world is really devastated, right? Like all the cities are basically leveled. Everything is in horrific disrepair. Like sand is covering everything. There are giant cockroaches like the size of wolves and stuff, and giant abominations like other animals that are grossly disfigured and massive and large and dangerous. You got like kind of like what you'd imagine in a lot of other post-apocalyptic shows where people are living very much in a hard scrabble kind of way, like knives and guns in hand, and ready to kill other people for scarce resources. And so that's sort of like the other dynamic that's at play. And then when you put it all together, I just feel like the show kind of amounts to a bloody romp through the post-apocalypse. It's just silly and fun, but also disturbing and murderous all at the same time.
It's really fun, bro. Fun is the word. It's fun.
I think in the first couple episodes, they did a really good job of introducing, like you said, those different worlds, giving us a sense of like what it's like to live in these places. And they started introducing some questions to us a little bit about like, where did these shelters come from, and like, why are they so, how come they're so goody two shoes, right? Like we're immediately aware that this utopic little commune that lives in the vault is like quote unquote too good to be true. And it's like, so how did they set that up? What kind of like weird things are they doing where everybody is so saccharine to each other? They're so like accommodating, and no one seems to have a sense of like, let me question things, right? Like everybody is just like accepting it. So I think we're really wondering from there, like how did we get to this point where everybody is just kind of like, okay, like the whole time, like whatever you say.
Yeah,
I
like
don't
the
wanna make
60s
waves.
TV show, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that there's no way that could be like naturally come about, and so we were wondering like, how did that, how did this world get set up? Is there something nefarious? Are they just actually that good hearted? What happened to the people who weren't good hearted? You're sort of wondering that things, and then they obviously get attacked, and so it's not like everybody's like that, and so you can see like how they sort of deal with that and their sort of responses. I don't know. I mean, I think in the beginning you're sort of just asking a lot of questions, like where do these play? And I don't know that they ever get answered. Like, where do they get these resources? Like, how do they keep growing food and staying alive under the vault? Under the ground where they're supposed to be sealed off. And like they're like, we never opened the vault, but like they opened the vault like 20 times during the show. And then
where do they get all their spam? Like they must have run out of spam at this point,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They've been down there for like hundreds of years.
So I think there's a lot of like suspension of disbelief stuff you have to do throughout the show, which is fine. I mean, I think it's it's a little bit silly, and that's okay. So
the vaults are stocked with resources. This means they said they got 200 years of resources. They said that already.
Yeah, that's a lot of resources.
I know.
For however many people there were, 50 people, 80 people down there. That's a lot of resources.
And they grow their food.
Yeah,
they grow their own food.
But again, the biggest premise of the show is that remember, when these vaults are created, this is still in a don't let the aesthetic fool you. They still have like high tech stuff. They still have self-sustaining nuclear vaults. That's why power is never a real concern despite hundreds of years. Like some of that, a lot of resource questions you can reasonably chalk up to they still have underground nuclear power. Like that, for me, that's where you have to really draw any suspension of disbelief. Don't forget, they still have, even in the post-apocalyptic shit, they still have future tech weapons that don't even exist in our world.
Yeah, but that doesn't provide food.
But it could.
They
They don't
literally
go
have
into
underground
depth about-
farms.
Yeah.
No, they don't.
I
It's
mean,
fine.
they got farms.
It doesn't end up being that important. Okay.
How do they feed
So-
people in Silo?
Also don't know.
Same thing.
Compost the dead people, I guess. Well, no, they showed us the farms in Silo, and they had massive levels where it was just like massive farms, right? Okay, we got a bunch of characters. There's like Lucy, who's I'd say nominally our main character. She's kind of centered in most of the scenes. Ghoul, who is
The
kind
Ghoul.
of like Red Skull. He's missing a nose, so you just see like straight into his nasal cavity. He wears a cool cowboy hat, and it's like a cool leather outfit, like
He's a
I don't know.
gunslinger.
Yeah, gunslinger. And then we have Maximus, who is a young man trying to find his place in the world. He seems like he doesn't really have like a family, so he's been sort of integrated into this Knights Brotherhood cult paramilitary group that takes in kind of all these misfit toys and soldiers. And he has a sense of ego about himself. He wants to accomplish great things, doesn't necessarily know how to get there, and doesn't always like have confidence in himself that he's going to do it. So, which of these characters stuck out to you? Was there any other characters that you were just like kind of into in terms of their effect on the story? Maybe just like how well the actors did portraying them. Anything that just stuck out to you about like characters? Sav, what were you thinking?
Yeah, so I mean, I was a big fan of Lucy when I was reading about some of just the, how they pitched the show and all that. One of the ways the show was pitched was the main character they described it as Ned Flanders in the apocalypse. And when I heard that endeared me to Lucy even more after I'd already seen the show, because I like how they made her character just engage with the wasteland top to bottom. So
I want to see Ned Flanders in the apocalypse, though. That would also be something
that's what we got with Lucy. It was like, she handles her business, but she's still golden rule, cartoonishly idealistic. But I did not think I was gonna like Lucy throughout the show, because I'm like, all right, she's gonna get screwed over the whole time, and she handles her business. I was a Lucy fan. Norm, the brother, did not think I would be. I thought that his plot line, I'll get to that in a different question, but I liked his character. Thought he would be a throwaway background character. He ends up being very important, and he's just very well acted, especially with his story and what we see with him. But and then and the obvious answer is that everyone likes the Ghoul. We could all spend half this episode probably talking about Walter Goggins and how good he was as the Ghoul. But yeah, he was dope too.
Brian?
My favorite character so far has definitely been Maximus.
Ooh, really?
Our dude in the Knights Brotherhood, who is portrayed as like, somebody who's bullied, kind of a weakling, not very confident in himself, but clearly he wants to be a knight, which in this world is, one of those guys in the mech armor,
power armor,
gets to be a badass and shoot people and defend justice, at least in his mind, right? And I think it sort of clinched for me in the first episode when he's basically a squire to these guys, right? He's in training to be a squire.
He carries his heavy bag and it
which
gets abused.
He's a glorified caddy. He's got to carry the hugest bag of God knows what.
It's bigger than him. It's literally bigger than
some gun that like the mech knight has to use. Yeah, it's enormous, and he's gotta like rub down the crotch plate of whoever he's squiring for. But in order to even get that role, right? Like he was not getting that role. His friend got it instead of him, and suddenly his friend injured their leg when they discovered razors that were in their
In their
boots.
boots.
And Maximus never says that he did it, but through the course of the show, based on his actions, because he keeps screwing people over so that he can be a squire and then a knight, you realize, like, oh, even though he's a very unsuspecting person, to do anything nefarious like that, he is willing to go that length and that distance, right? So he is probably the person that put the razors in the boots. When he does become a squire, he kills his own he was letting his own knight die at first, and then ultimately kills him when he realizes he would be in danger for failing to do his duty. He takes over the knight's suit, and then we get this great dynamic when Maximus, posing as the knight Titus, gets his own squire, who turns out to be one of the guys that used to bully him in squire school. And which is like such a great dynamic because he's trying to be like the tough knight, based on the guy whose role he took over, but develops kind of a relationship and a trust and bond with his own squire, the guy who used to kick the shit out of him. So I really have enjoyed Maximus, seeing him play this sort of like two sides of the same coin role, where he's somebody who could be a little bit on edge, but for the most part is kind of diminutive throughout the show, and is also trying to navigate his path in the post-apocalyptic world.
You know what's weird, Brian? He's not my favorite character. He's the most interesting character.
Yeah.
Or he's one of the most interesting characters. Like, Lucy's my favorite. She's not the most interesting.
Yeah.
Maximus isn't my favorite, but he's like, I heard, you can almost describe these different characters, right, as like the alignment chart of Lucy being a hyper good character, because Fallout games, also for context, they're RPGs where your decisions and you can be good, evil. It's one of those type of games where you can be neutral, cruel, poetic, all that. And Lucy's this super nice. The ghoul falls kind of in like the more self-serving, I'd say, evil. But you're right, Maximus is almost in the middle. He's this weird neutral character where, because he's not cruel on purpose. He's cruel to people who is cruel to him. But he wants to do good things. But it's like watching it, like it's dope. I'm glad that he's your favorite character because I really want to see more of him and how his story plays out.
Yeah, he's definitely an X factor. We don't quite know what he's going to do.
You don't know what he's going to do. You see things, it's like, what is he going to do? And it's like, I don't know. Let's see.
He's like, they develop him and change him through the show in a way that they don't maybe do to the other characters. And so I think that's also why when you're saying the most interesting, it's like he's the most dynamic and is like changing the most through the show and like reacting actually to his circumstances in a way that like other people actually have more of a set idea of who they are already. And he's being sort of molded by these events, which is, I think that makes sense that Maximus kind of stands out in that way. And that's actually one of my criticisms of the show is like, I kind of wish they did a little bit more of that to the other characters. Like Lucy, for the most part, she just ends up being kind of, straight-laced, goody two-shoes throughout. And she learns to do violence, that like violence is acceptable, especially in self-defense, but she still is not, she's not kind of dynamic in that same way that Maximus is like changing, and actually being affected by the events of the show. I wanted to talk about the ghoul because I think when you guys said like, oh, Maximus is interesting, I was thinking that, even though the ghoul maybe doesn't have a ton of change throughout the show in terms of his personality or in terms of his priorities, he is someone who we want to know more about, and they start sort of like trickling out, like, how did you become this way? Because like throughout the show, he has a certain kind of code for how he acts. He's not just like trying to kill anybody. He does have some sense of like right and wrong, or what he thinks is right and wrong, and you get senses of that here and there, like with his other ghoul, that friend that he meets, acquaintance that he meets, Roger.
We gets
Like,
butt jerky from
yeah, and he,
It's jerky.
but like
ass jerky. Excuse me.
it was clear, like at one time they got
Delicious.
along, they were acquaintances and whatever, and he like tells him to tell a story, and he introduces him to Lucy, and then he shoots him in the head so that he doesn't see it coming, right? He's, in some ways you could tell like that was a mercy killing, because he knew that if the guy continues to turn, it wouldn't be good for Roger, but it also wouldn't be good for everybody else. And so, he's willing to make the hard call, and you get that idea that in another life he would have been a protector. I think pretty early on you're suspecting that he also is the same person as the movie star Cooper Howard in the beginning, and I don't think they ever like confirm that they do, right? Like by the end you are certain that it's him and it's the same guy. And so I think what makes him really interesting is like, how did you get to this place where you were like clearly a family man, you loved your daughter, you were a super, like a famous movie star. How do you get to the point where you're just like blowing people away with your giant pistol cannon thing that he's carrying around, where it like puts like Terminator sized holes in people? And how do you get so good at shooting and staying alive? And like, how did you turn into a ghoul? Like, I don't think I'm not 1,000% sure how someone turns into a ghoul. And then, yeah, I think there's just like a lot of questions that surround him. Like, what is he really after? Is he just a bounty hunter? So I think in those first few episodes, you're just like, I want to know more about this guy. I want to know more about where he comes from. And what how does he survive? Because they tell us that he's lived for 200 years or so. It's like, how did you survive for that long? Obviously human lifespans aren't that long, so how did he make it through all of that time? So I don't know, I really enjoyed kind of, or I don't know if I enjoyed it, but I really wanted to know more about him. They like they set him up as a cool character in the beginning, and then from there you're just like, oh, okay, I want to know more about you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't fully understand the ghoul and the other ghoulish people, like how they became that way. Like, how are they living for so long because of the drugs that they're taking? Do they look that way because they were closest to the bomb blast, or just because of the drugs that they're taking?
No, ghouls. So in the series, ghouls are like an enemy / just type of people, and they're literally just people either pre or post war who were heavily affected by radiation. The radiation can either kill you, which happened to plenty of people. It can turn you into a ghoul, like it did for several characters we saw, including in the episode The Ghouls. But when you're a ghoul, you still retain your humanity and you're still a person. You're just physically disfigured. And also a side effect is that you have a radically longer lifespan. So the biggest defining factor about ghouls is that you become a ghoul, but now you're not like functionally immortal, but you're going to live a very, very long time.
But that was not clear.
When do they cross the threshold into being a zombie?
So there's feral ghouls. It's like a dice roll. Some people become feral ghouls immediately because there's certain characters who become ghouls after the war just because of intense radiation, because the radiation didn't go away, and they became feral monsters. But it's kind of like it just depends. Some people are ghouls and they're totally like they're business owners in the games and they're like major characters and all that, and they're just doing regular stuff. But some are just troves of mindless creatures in the streets. So that's kind of its own dynamic in the games of ghouls are discriminated against because you're not sure if they're going to turn or not. But basically, they're just disfigured people who live a long time because of radiation. I mean, you saw in the ghouls episode, a lot of the ghouls were, they had a regular voice. They were dressed normal. They just looked hyper disfigured. So, ghouls.
Ghouls, like you would.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that answer. But I agree with you, Wes, about you talking about him. So a really funny, interesting thing with the show seems to be the theme of change, right? Like, you have one character who's constantly changing, Maximus. Another character who's trying to not be changed, Lucy in the Wasteland, which is actually what I liked about her arc. I know you said you didn't like that. I thought her trying to be true to herself and not change was what was fun to watch, despite all the awful shit that happens to her. And then you have the ghoul who has already changed. He's set in his ways, I think. But to your point, the captivating part of his story is, how did you change? a lot happened all those years, and we're seeing bits and pieces of it. But I love the balancing of change between someone who is resistant, who is actively having it happen, and who it's happened to. The beauty is, how did you get here? I like that balance, and that's one thing I'm really appreciating with all three characters.
And then the resistance to change on Lucy's part and most of her fellow shelter dwellers, right, is the most satirical part of the show, which is really hilarious, right? Because they're so high-minded, right? Like, we're gonna live by the golden rule. Like, we want to rehabilitate the people that came in and murdered our fellow shelter people. And so they're like the rich, high-minded liberals in the show who are just like totally removed from what's really going on, how the world is. But like they're sticking to our high morals. Like, this is how we got to do it, you guys. And they're like applauding for each other, like, oh, we're gonna teach these prisoners Shakespeare. Yes. No, maybe we should start with Kant. And meanwhile, like, Norm is like, no, I like they killed my family and our people. They kidnapped my dad. Like, yeah, fuck these people.
F them.
Yeah.
Like, so, real.
Yeah. So like that dissonance, I think, is really funny in the show. And where I'm kind of like where a lot of the social like bite comes from.
So there's like a lot of stories going on at the same time, and some of them start to converge by the end. Is there one particular storyline that was like, oh, this kind of stuck out to you as something you were following more closely, or every time that storyline came on, you were like, okay, like let's go now? Sav?
For me, it's the vaults. Like, I mean, definitely all of the stuff with Cooper Howard pre-war and all that stuff, like his pre-war storyline is really intriguing, but you know how that ends. War, the how is what's interesting, but Norm's vault storyline really intrigued me. One of my favorite things about the Fallout games is that you'll stumble across vaults like those and others, some abandoned, some with people in them. And without going into spoilers, Brian, because you're probably coming up near this episode, it's not a big spoiler, but you learn the truth behind a lot of these vaults and what's going on. And for many of the vaults, there is some type of deeper conspiracy, which they always hint at. The fun part is figuring out, okay, what's the conspiracy happening in this particular vault? And in the games, that's always one of my favorite things to explore is, man, what happened here, or what was the original plans? So knowing that we just have one and that's a major plot line is, I always get super sucked deep into that. Like when we were saying, oh, the elections are looking really, really shady right now, I'm like, okay, there's some bullshit happening. I want to know what's up, because Vault-Tech's always on that bull, and it's always good and entertaining. So didn't expect it either. Not even to say that the other storylines aren't interesting, but I didn't expect like a little thriller, mystery drama subplot to keep me as engaged as it has been.
Well, I think it ends up being the main plot by the end.
Yeah, but you know, right? you don't know where they're gonna go with that. You literally have you're being caught up by the badass cowboy ghoul, Lucy out just getting fingers chopped off exploring, Maximus just tooting and dooting his way across the wasteland. You're not thinking about the tiny, boring younger brother of the main character in the vault still, who stayed because he was scared to fight. That's not the plot line you think. That's the plot line when you think, oh, is it time for me to grab a cup of water? And it turns out, oh, shit, no, I need to lock in and take notes. I'm rewinding stills on those plot lines. I'm trying to see, like, wait, what did I miss? Oh, shit, it's up.
Brian?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the vaults is like the most intriguing thing, right? Like how they work, what's going on. And part of what makes Cooper's backstory pre-bombs also revolves around the vaults, right? It's like, oh, his wife works for, this company that is creating these vaults, and that they're actively selling to people to get placements in. His wife is working so hard so that their family can get a cushy placement in
one of the
good
best
vaults, right?
Like, said, one of the
so
good ones.
There are tiers of vaults.
Yeah. But he's clearly not in the vault, so like, what happened there?
Yeah. So a lot of things left to be explored, and then he has that great conversation with his friend, his Hollywood friend, who's become more liberal minded, more they what they consider red in the show, who's talking about, well, like the people that make the vaults have a fiduciary responsibility to make the vaults desirable and to get people to buy into them, so they have to push for war. And so like that alone is like a very interesting idea that, yeah, like, you know, maybe it's big business, it's big vault that's creating
Big vault.
the global tensions that produce a nuclear fallout, right? It is in their best interest for this to happen. And so that's a crazy idea. And so everything surrounding the vaults, I think, provides a show with a lot of intrigue, where you are getting like a steady drip of information, and we're sort of piecing it together as an audience and figuring out like what created this world that all of our characters are inhabiting.
Mm-hmm. Capitalism will and has destroyed our world. Brought to you by Amazon.
I really like the abominations, especially the axolotl that like
the gulper.
That thing was crazy.
Bites her and then like eats the head and like swallows it and like really ruins the whole thing for them.
Nightmare fuel.
He comes back in like a later episode, and he's like now like trying to chew up this other character, the Thaddeus guy. And you see that those little like things are actually just thumbs.
Yeah, they're not teeth. They're fingers. Disgusting.
Which is its own little foreshadowing, you know, like that's, you know.
Yeah, fingers and appendages are always really important in the show.
Basically, by like trying to pull Thaddeus out of the axolotl's throat, they triggered a gag reflex.
Yeah.
And it spits out everything it's consumed, and that's just like a gross idea. like half a human body like going in and out of its throat, and then it throws up.
That scene was so simultaneously, like, that's what I mean, right? That scene was the perfect blend of the stakes are high, this creature is a monster abomination that will kill you, but while these two goofballs are just help me, and the silly ridiculous music is playing, but it all ends in like this monster being killed, and like it just balances all those different things so ridiculously well. Like that feels like that scene was a key.
We don't know that he was a monster. Maybe he's just misunderstood.
That thing was an abomination. You literally said earlier that they were abominations, and you were correct.
That's what they call them.
Backpedal to be contrarian. They're nasty, but yeah,
they're just not understood.
Speaking of abominations, one thing that I also appreciated was when Thaddeus, Maximus's new squire, starts talking about like what he was doing before he went to squire school, was that he was a shitter at a bug farm. Which just meant
like they fed me up.
They fed me, so I pooped, and then there's like protein in my poop for the bugs to eat. And it took me a second to think about that, and I realized like, oh, they are farming those giant cockroaches or other giant bugs probably for meat. That is what they're eating ultimately, because those are the new animals. Those are the predominant animals that are.
Oh, you think it's the giant cockroaches?
Yeah, I think they're producing some animals at a bug farm. Like why do they have a bug farm in the first place? Probably
no, you're right. No, Brian.
I thought it was like regular flies they were harvesting.
No, I mean, because it doesn't matter. The point is that it's
gross.
It's nasty. They're in the trenches.
The point is yuck.
Yeah, we're in the trenches.
Yeah, and I don't know if this counts as like a storyline. It's not really a storyline, but that guy who's, you know, kind of a bully, but like also a coward and whatever.
Thaddeus.
Yeah, Thaddeus. He runs into the like weird Beetlejuice looking guy who like sells like fake medicines.
The snake oil salesman who also fornicates with chickens. That's who
that guy.
We're calling.
Yeah. But it works. His foot just like magically comes back together.
Yeah.
And I didn't expect that. I was like, oh, I thought you were just giving him like fake meds and be like, talk to me in 2 weeks, and then he'd just be out of there stealing his fusion core. But no, he gave him the real deal that helps him be like a super healer, you know, Wolverine style. His destroyed foot. I mean, literally his toe is hanging on by a tendon, not by any bones. And it morphs itself back together and heals up, and he's like good to go, back to normal. So that was kind of an unexpected. I love that, like, that they used our expectation of what he had done before as being like, dishonest, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, he actually has access to real medicine or real something, real
It
elixirs.
feels like such a video game side quest, right? It's like, why are we going after this snake oil salesman? Oh, we actually get a benefit from it.
Yeah.
Ta-da.
Big Fallout, honestly, literal Fallout energy of just sometimes a random side quest that's just so like, wait, what? And now the fact that it's going to turn him into a ghoul is its own. Oh, and there's. Yeah. That's gonna be fun later to see how they go with that, because that's gonna be a running gag, and I'm here for it.
All right, so I don't know. I feel like we've talked a lot about like what we like about it. Are there any things that maybe haven't worked in the show? What are the director's notes here from award-winning director Brian Redondo?
The director's notes are like, I don't know. It's a good show. It's a very fun show. Is it a great or masterful show? I would say no, probably not.
Oh, right off the bat, he's ready to say no.
Yeah. I mean, like, it's good, but like, do you guys feel like this is must watch TV? I don't feel that way.
Listeners, let us know. Is it must watch TV?
I'm very happy with the time I've spent with it. What would kick it up that next tier? I'm not sure. I'm not entirely sure. Like, if that means like trying to get us more heavily invested in certain relationships. And this is one of those things where shows like this might have an inherent problem, right? Where they're trying to have a lot of fun, and because of that, maybe we as an audience don't always take everything so seriously. Not that everything has to be serious, but like that we're not putting so much magnitude on stuff that transpires on the show. And perhaps that, brings the stakes down just a little bit to where this is not like, oh my God, I'm 110% invested in everything that happens. And so like maybe the show is missing a little bit of that, right? Because as we said before, like Lucy is sort of like playing this Ned Flanders role. So like, that's kind of silly. The ghoul, we don't even understand the ghoul. He's been around for like so long. What connection do we have to him? And same thing with Maximus, right? He's just like a sort of a neutral character that we don't know what to expect from. Is it entertaining? Absolutely. But are we invested is the ultimate question.
Yeah. I think my problem is like sort of some of the motivations and pacing feel off. So like she's going after her father, but like we don't really get updates on the father. We don't know still until the very, very end why he was taken, right? So you're sitting there and being like, yeah, I mean, like, I get it. You're trying to get your dad back, but like what pieces of information are you gaining that's getting you closer to your dad? Like, none. You have a MacGuffin of some kind of like thing that the doctor guy put in his head, but you don't know what it does or why it's important. And again, you don't learn until the last episode what it does. And you're sort of unraveling a conspiracy, right, of the vaults, but you're not really getting a ton of information. Like, I guess you get a little bit like, oh, the 31 to 33 thing, right? He kind of uncovers that in episode 6 or 7, something like that. But yeah, I don't know. It just felt like they waited so long to like give you meaningful information that it was just sort of like, okay, like, yeah, it's kind of just adventure-y, I guess, but for no reason. And so I think that would be my biggest criticism of the show, is that there isn't enough for you to like keep watching through the show. Like, I just kept being like, I still have questions. I'm on episode 6. I still have questions. You're giving me more questions, but no answers, right? Like, they sort of didn't balance to me that like more answers plus more questions. It was just sort of like, here's more questions.
So I think like questions are fine, right? Like that doesn't sink a show. The real thing is like, why do we care about the answer to those questions?
Right.
Like they can keep introducing other questions. Like Lost is famous for this, right? Like just like crazy shit kept happening, season to season. But because in that show you really understand every single character's motivations and what's at stake for them, that you want them to find out. You want them also to get off the island. In this, like, even though I'm very curious about vault tech and what's going on in all these vaults and why they're set up the way they are and why the conspiracies are being orchestrated as such, but I really don't know like whether or not that even has much relevance. Like,
Yeah.
okay, so like they're doing shady shit in the vaults. So what? Whereas in a show like Silo, there's, we know kind of like what the stakes are because we have such a myopic view of the world, right? Like,
Right.
We don't know what's outside the other silos. We don't know whether it's real or fake outside the silos. So everything that happens within that one silo matters so much in that show. Whereas in this, we see everything. We kind of have like this great 360 perspective. And it seems like, okay, so even if there is conspiracy going on in the vaults, like what
The
does that
Wastelanders
what
will
does
still
that change to the wasteland? It's still a wasteland. Yeah.
Right. Sav, notes?
Ooh, sorry, I was just had a lot of disagreements with y'all, but I'm gonna focus on my notes, which is just
No, I want to hear it. What's your
Clap
pushback?
back. Come on.
I mean, the big pushback is that, I mean, West, for your point, I think the questions are what make the series interesting. But the biggest
Yeah,
thing
but they
is
go
that,
too far with it, and they don't give us any answers
you want
until
me to
the
tell
very
you?
end, and they just
It's
cram them
it's
all into the
world
last
building,
episode.
though.
Hold on, you
the
want me
world
to tell
building
you?
is fun.
I'm trying
They just
to
cram
you
them into
you wanted me
episode
to
8.
push back. You don't even let me push back. Lord, I didn't even get to finish my thing. My son just came spewing. No,
He's trying
you
to
need,
pour gas on the fire right now.
right? You need to have those questions, and I think it's fine that they're asking those questions because this is a show that's going to be having multiple seasons. Like, you're not going to be able to. This isn't one of those. It was 8 episodes. They were going to wrap this up in a neat bow. Clearly, that was never their original intention. They wanted to see if they can get more, more mileage out the series. So the fact that we're going to even have a second season alone means that I'm okay with there still being questions, because a lot of questions we did have in the beginning were answered. I'm okay. Like, I was okay with that part. I went into this show, keep in mind, even though I know what happens in the larger world, I didn't know the details of the plot at all in terms of just it's all the stuff you were asking about. So I didn't know either.
Yeah.
And I felt like the questions I had in terms of some of the initial vault mystery stuff, the father, some of how the pre-war stuff happened, they answered. But there's still more questions they posed that I thought were good questions that will set up for interesting plot and, whatever's going to happen in the next season. I didn't have an issue with that at all, because I would feel differently if this was a limited series where it's one season and we're done. Like, if they said this is one and done, I would agree with you about asking and leaving questions. But knowing that there's going to be more, I'm okay with that, because you gotta keep the long. This is long form storytelling.
Yeah. Can I say something? So, I think maybe I wasn't clear, because like what you're saying doesn't necessarily address what I was saying. Like, I agree with you that you don't have to answer every question in season 1. I think my issue was we wait literally until the last episode to start to answer these questions. And I feel like the questions have to start being answered a little bit ahead of time, and some of them maybe should have been answered earlier to create new problems, right? Like, they should create more conflicts or more like difficulties for the characters to overcome in order to like propel the show forward. Instead, like, they're really late in the game and you're still learning things like, oh, Vault 31, did blank, blank, blank. Or like, the mom's Pip-Boy was used to open the outside. And then we just go on to these other stories about like being outside. So it's like they're about being in the wasteland. So it's like the show kind of could have given us more information, I think, earlier to actually like propel the story forward instead of being like, here's the major info dump at the end. Aren't you guys happy you now know the story? And it's like, yeah, but like, again, all
well,
those
then
reveals didn't necessarily, I don't know, they just didn't help like the story. They didn't really explain like
see, in that case, I think we just fundamentally
what
disagree
the
because
effect on Lucy was going to be. You know, like you know what I mean?
no, I don't. I think I fundamentally disagree in that I think in many of the middle episodes, even up until the end, they do leave you breadcrumbs and answer questions and start to have you paint the picture. I don't think it was. I think they do give you a lot of info at the end. I also think they gave you a lot of info leading up to that too. They had multiple storylines, but I think they did that in the form of the pre-war stuff, in the form of even Norm doing his investigation stuff. That was still, we're still in like I mean, if Brian has seen it at that point, that's happening in the middle while the series is in full swing. To me, that's the opposite of it all happens at the end. Now, I think if the Vault conspiracy stuff and all that other stuff was happening in the last like 1-2 episodes, I feel differently, but I don't think that was the case. Vault Tech being sketchy and the details of its sketchiness was something we at least see. Honestly, that was hinted at from the very beginning, and we do get more info. There's questions about the dad and Moldaver and all of that. You slowly get little bits and pieces leading up to that to tell you, like you learn, oh, Moldaver has connections to some previous characters. I don't know if that's actually a spoiler for Brian, but like there's a bunch of little things I think in episodes 4 through 6, which to me is not the end, where they absolutely give you quality exposition, world building, and still answer questions about what the larger plot and conflict is. Like that's where I think we just outright disagree. They do give you a lot at the end, but I think that's literally what a finale is. A lot's going to happen. Like I wouldn't want a finale where nothing happens. We'd be having a different conversation of saying it ended on a dud. But I think you and I just view how we got the information differently. But yeah, I think I have to agree to disagree.
I agree with you, Savon. Like, there's definitely an investigation, and you are being introduced to more things as the series progresses. I think the missing thing though is like, why is any of that important to the characters that we are supposed to follow?
Yeah,
I
think
that's
that's a
the only
valid question.
thing to me that's missing.
No, I think that's a valid question. I chalk that up to the series isn't going to answer all that in one season, especially when they have more of this to tell in like a second season. Now, if you're a season and if you're 2-3 season in and it feels like, hey, we still don't really know diddly squat about this, then I'd feel differently. But I've never seen any show of this, like, in terms of the story and clear size of the story they're trying to tell, where all of that, even the things that you think, what are you supposed to care about? You're not going to always get that answer in the first season. Plenty of good shows have had things that seem like not a big deal. That's, oh, actually, this was a key plot line later, but you kind of have to just stay invested. So I'll feel more strongly about that, Brian, maybe come season 2, where it's like, hey, are we just kind of threading along these things and it's not making any progress? Because otherwise, I think from how I felt in episode 1 to 8, questions were answered, new questions were given, and I felt like I had a reason to care about how it relates to the story, because without getting into spoilers, some of the big reveal stuff does tie into other specific like main characters and what their things are. So, but you have to finish the story to kind of have your own stance on that. My biggest note for the show is that I think the action sequences just leave a little bit to be wanting. I think outside of that Philly shootout where the ghoul does all the slow motion, really cool stuff, I think some of the action scenes were kind of just I was disappointed in a lot of the fights with the Brotherhood of Steel Armor. Maybe it felt a little too bulky for my taste. Sometimes I felt like the fights just felt a little slow and stiff. But also,
the armor doesn't seem like all that powerful.
I wasn't
right?
so, and also, yeah, so my biggest note is that, but I also recognize that this is a show that's not really going to be about its action sequences. This isn't a shonen anime where I expect really dope, long animated fight scenes, but I would like to have some slightly cleaner. Like, I didn't like that the Gulper had all that conflict with those two people, but no one really got effed up by it. Like, those were like some of my little notes of make the creatures, they look threatening, make what they do to people more threatening.
Fair. And I still have a problem with the MacGuffin that we don't know what it does until the very end. Like, in order for a MacGuffin to be important. I feel like
No,
you got to know
wrong.
what it does. No?
No, that's like the definition of MacGuffin, that
The
you
whole
don't
point
know
of
what
a
it
MacGuffin
is.
is that that's the whole point. Is that
That's why it's a MacGuffin. If you knew what it was, then it'd be more of an actual plot device.
Yeah.
Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, it would be more of a thing. Then you wouldn't even call it a MacGuffin.
Yeah,
Okay, well,
it's like in
like-
Pulp
I think-
Fiction, what's in the briefcase doesn't matter, because if you knew what it was, that would change
That
its role in
changes
the
the
story.
story, yeah.
But
but I think it did
The
matter.
whole point
and
is
it,
that you're
like,
not supposed to, like, you don't really care. Like, it's just a vehicle for them, for something to chase after.
Yeah.
Right?
Now, Wes, you're right. It does become a plot device at the end, but I
right.
think
So then it should have been that way through the whole thing.
No, because I think, well, one, you learn that a bunch of the other characters did know what the MacGuffin was. They just, and that's why they're after it, because certain people did know exactly what it was that they were after. It's just not everybody. I think the only person who didn't really know was Lucy, but it didn't matter what it was for Lucy because it was just a means to get to her dad. So it didn't matter what it was, even if it was consequential to the other factions. But I actually think most of the other factions did know what the MacGuffin was, more or less, or like an idea of what it could do or its importance. We, the audience, don't know, but I think that's actually fine because it did still motivate the story, but you still get to have a nice pull back the curtain moment. And while, yes, it then becomes a plot device, I think, not, being spoiler sensitive for Brian, it sets up the next season in a way of, okay, cool, this is no longer the MacGuffin, but now the world has changed in a way of, oh man, the status quo is going to shift next season. Like, I had zero issue with that, but I'm with Brian. Like, you don't need to explain the thing. It's okay to not know something.
Yeah, Wes.
The writers do that
also,
on purpose.
Hat tip to them for casting Ben Linus from Lost in a role where he is doing experiments on dogs and on himself, very much in the vein of the Dharma Initiative from Lost. So I really appreciated that fun little callback.
I didn't catch that. That's nice.
All right, we're at the end. Should people who haven't seen the show yet, or maybe they're just in the first episode, should they continue to watch the show? We know season 2 has been confirmed. So, like, should they watch season 1, and are you going to watch season 2? Brian, what's your final call?
I think, one, if you're a gamer, if you're a video gamer, like, of course you got to watch this show, right? Like, it feels as fun as a good video game. Traversing through this wild open world, zany characters, little bits of satire, little bits of action, little bits of emotion. It's all very video game like. And then I think for anybody else, that's just like looking for a good time through a different type of fantasy world, right? I think especially if you like post-apocalyptic worlds and stories, I think this one is actually very refreshing compared to others that are, far off the deep end into like how grave and dire and miserable things are. Like, this takes a very different tone, and I think that's just a treat to watch in and of itself. But as I said, is it must watch? Like, if none of those things are really your cup of tea, like, you could pass on this one. You could pass. But I've thoroughly enjoyed it so far.
Sav.
I'm gonna echo a lot of what Brian said. If you're a gamer, definitely need to watch it. But yeah, I think this isn't a show that I'm gonna be able to get my mom or my brother or like, your hardcore non-gaming friend to watch necessarily. But this show is still refreshing and different from what a lot of other things on TV are out right now. So is it its own original like series? No. But if you haven't played the games, it might as well be. And there's not a lot of content out there that does what this Fallout series is doing, which again is that beautiful combo of ultra violence, satire, and then a blend of really vibrantly different aesthetics of, like, is there even a word for it, Brian? That like is it 40s style? Like,
yeah,
I
just
don't even
the
know
retro
what the
future thing.
Yeah,
right?
The retro future style combined with dirty post-apocalypse, where you have these clean, cheesy billboard ads, but then teethless, drug-addicted cannibals covered in sores and cuts, and like that all exists in the same world. But then also a cheesy robot talking in the voice of Matt Berry. Like, there's not a lot of content out there that's gonna give you that. And if you're looking for something different, I think Fallout is worth checking out. It's not for everybody, but I think if you watch at least the first 2 episodes, you'll have a pretty good idea of whether it's for you or not. But it's a well done show. I mean, and I was reading interviews about how so many folks on the creation of the show were like hardcore fans of the games. And even me as a fan of the game, there's certain scenes where if you pause the still, it looks almost exactly like what scavenging an abandoned building in a game would look like, where there's a random thing of drugs, a syringe, some glue, some duct tape, a wine bottle. Like the sets were clearly made by people who were huge fans of the game. And so just the attention to detail and effort put into the show really shows. If you haven't played the games, you might not always feel it, but I want to just kind of name, this wasn't a half-assed, haphazardly put together show to make some bread. They really put their ankles in it, and I think everyone should at least give it a watch off that alone.
Even their third ankles.
I'm saying, look, we complain all the time about shows having care. Did they put effort into it? Is it this? I'm like, no, this show, they gave a damn when they made this, and especially for game adaptations, which can be very cash grabby and just they want to use the IP to make some easy dough. They didn't do that, and I got respect for it. So, you know, it's not for everyone, but I think it's worth giving an honest shot.
And you're right. The world building in this is top notch. Like every environment, and they show us a lot of different ones too, right? Like it's not all flat and the same. There's always something new. Even the shelters are different. Even like the ravaged, buildings, some are covered in sand, some are like covered in green, where nature has taken over. Like there's just it's just so rich throughout.
Yeah, which is why I was okay with, Wesley, know that was more of a critique of yours, but that's why I was okay with, I don't really need them to constantly be moving forward every major plot point. So, especially for post-apocalypse, the beauty of that is you want to see how has the world changed? What the hell happened? What are different ways this change has showed up? So even just a scene of Lucy and Maximus trying to cross a bridge. They were just trying to cross a damn bridge. And that scene was so long, intense, and ridiculous. And the people are lying and whispering. And Lucy's just like, dude, can we like be chill for once? And the answer is no. And like
no,
for me,
Lucy.
like for me, moments like that were more important than knowing what the item in the head did. Because I care more about just seeing this post-apocalyptic world be a post-apocalypse.
My favorite part of that scene was that Maximus gets shot with a tooth. It's a human tooth that was used as a bullet, which is a great connection to what he did earlier when he sold his tooth to get some money.
Mm-hmm. It all just kind of comes full circle of like, yo, man,
teeth are valuable.
This is how this world gets down, dog. It's the gutter.
Yeah, and how did like bottle caps become their currency? You don't have to answer that.
Okay,
that was just rhetorical.
All right,
they're shiny.
But look, but I'm saying, well, sometimes you be taking stuff like that and saying that's a real minus against the show.
No,
they're using bottle caps as currency. Nope, dumb, hate it.
They never explain it.
No, I was okay with that. That was fine. I think I'm mostly on the I agree with what you guys said. It's like they took a lot of care. They clearly love the world. I think they made a great choice in not trying to redo a storyline that's already been done in one of the video games. They created a brand new story. I think Lucy is someone who has showed up in the games, it sounds like, but this is taking it in a different direction. No.
All the characters are totally original characters.
Okay, so I mean, all of that's fun. They just use the world, right, to play in, and I think that was cool. Some things that are a little bit too video gamey, even Philly. I don't know. It just felt, when I'm watching it, I'm like, there's no way they set up this encampment this way, from the refuge of old things, especially if the tech didn't work. You wouldn't be able to stack planes like this, and it just wouldn't make sense to do it. But it's like a video game. It's fun to just play with what these broken down objects would be thrown together and make into a fun little play set. But I'm tend to be on the pass side. I think ultimately I just didn't end up caring enough about any of the characters besides the ghoul to really stay on. But yeah, but to really want to watch more, or to really stay on it. I think had they given us more ghoul and less other people, I think maybe that would be different. But I'm just not that interested in in Maximus or Lucy by, 3/4 of the way through the season. I'm like, all right, fine. You're fine. All of you are fine. But nothing I was really deeply invested in terms of like seeing someone succeed or not succeed or whatever. It just like I was like, okay, like I'll just keep watching and it's entertaining. But there's so much that's competing for like our attention right now and like in real life too. So I don't know. I think it could be a pass for some people. I'm not super excited about like, oh, there's another season coming. Like you said that and I was like, all right, fine. Probably not gonna watch that. So I'm on the pass side of this one, I think. It's not horrible. I think it's worth watching for some people. It's entertaining, cool characters, stuff like that. Just didn't love it. That's all. Didn't love it.
Oh, Wesley. But I kind of agree that I don't know if I would watch the season 2. Like, I feel like I'm satisfied with this. Like, of course, it depends. Like, for me, what bomb is dropped at the end of episode 8. But it feels like one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, I had a good time. Am I really craving a follow-up? Maybe not.
More focus, maybe.
You watch the Lakers lose.
The Lakers 0-3 at the point that we're recording this. They play tomorrow. They're gonna lose again. It'll be 0-4. They'll have lost 13 straight, guys. It's gonna be good times. I'm here for it. I still love them.
Talk about fallout.
There's always next year.
Mm-hmm.
Is Darvin Ham gonna lose his job if they go 0-4? He might.
Maybe. I don't know. They're just not talented enough.
Yeah, just get rid of them.
Could be true.
They should have traded LeBron mid-season.
Wow, that's a hot take. All right, friends, that'll do it for us. Fallout, it's on Amazon. Go check it out if any of that spoke to you, and then tell us, which characters were you into? What questions were you hoping to be answered? I'll talk to you later, guys. See ya. Bye.